The sun over San Patricio wasn't a friend, it was a brass hammer, driving the heat into the baked clay and cracked adobe. Dust, the eternal shroud of the New Mexico territory, clung to everything. The swinging doors of the saloon, the skeletal mesquite trees, and the very breath in a man's lungs. The year was 1878, and law here was measured not by statutes, but by the weight of a man's Colt peacemaker. The town was usually dead by mid-afternoon, save for the drone of flies and the distant rhythmic clop-clop of unseen hooves. But today, the silence felt brittle, like dried bone ready to snap. Sheriff Silas Thorne, a man whose mustache was as thick as his cruelty, had made sure of that silence just hours before. He'd executed Thomas Turner, a farmer whose only crime was refusing Thorne's inflated protection fee right there in the dusty town square. Billy the Kid, William H. Bonney, rode into this suffocating stillness not as a conqueror, but as a shadow passing through. He was younger than the legend suggested, lean and wired, his eyes the startling cold blue of glacial ice, perpetually scanning the horizon. His Winchester, oiled and ready, rested across the saddle pommel of his paint pony. The Kid was passing through, chasing rumors of a payroll shipment east, but the unnatural quiet of San Patricio snagged his attention like a burr on wool. The air tasted metallic, a scent he knew too well, fresh gunpowder and spilled life. He stopped at the edge of the square. The town's few residents, a handful of shopkeepers and frightened wives, were bolted behind shuttered windows. Only two things commanded the plaza: the blistering sun and a rough-hewn wooden cart. In that cart lay a corpse, covered only by a filthy, stained sackcloth. And straining against the weight, his thin frame silhouetted against the white glare, was a boy. The boy, no older than 13, moved with a horrifying, unnatural gait. One leg dragged uselessly, the other seemed barely capable of bearing weight. He was tied to the cart with frayed rope, using his upper body strength to pull the dead weight of his father across the scorched earth, aiming for the meager shade of the blacksmith's closed shop. Every inch was a brutal negotiation between his shredded hands and the splintered wood. Billy dismounted, the jingle of his spurs cutting the quiet like a thrown knife. He didn't draw. This wasn't a fight, it was an autopsy of the town's soul. The boy, Eli, didn't look up until the shadow of Billy's Stetson fell over him. He stopped pulling, his breath ragged, tasting of alkali, dust, and despair. His eyes, red-rimmed and fiercely determined, rose to meet the outlaw's gaze. "You best move along, mister," Eli rasped, his voice thin but edged with defiance. "This ain't your concern." "Sheriff Thorne, don't take kindly to company." Billy stepped closer, his gaze sweeping from the boy's crippled legs to the outline of the body beneath the sack. He saw the dried blood staining the wood of the cart. "Sheriff Thorne," Billy repeated, the name sounding like a curse stripped bare. "He do this?" Eli spat a mouthful of dust onto the ground. "He called Pa a trespasser. Pa just wanted to plant corn." Thorne laughed when he put the lead in him. Laughed and rode off toward the Coyote's Rest Saloon. The Kid knelt, ignoring the protest from his own stiff joints. He gently, almost hesitantly, pulled back the sackcloth just enough to confirm what he already knew. Thomas Turner was beyond help. Billy's cold blue eyes, usually calculating, narrowed with a genuine consuming fury. This wasn't about cattle or stolen gold. This was an insult to the very code of the West, no matter how warped that code might be. "Why you pullin' him, son?" Billy asked, his voice dropping to a low, resonant murmur that carried authority without needing to shout. "The desert'll take him soon enough." Eli's face crumpled, but the tears never fell. "The desert won't take him before I give him a proper stone to rest under. I'm taking him to Blackwater Creek. Folks there said they'd help. But it's a long walk, mister, and I ain't much for walking these days." A long, tense silence followed, broken only by the sound of the wind beginning to pick up, swirling dust devils into brief, frantic dances across the square. Billy looked at the sheer, impossible will radiating from this broken child. It mirrored a fierce, destructive impulse Billy himself understood deeply. A man wronged is a weapon forged. Billy stood up, his silhouette darkening the boy. He reached inside his coat, not for his pistol, but for a heavy silver flask. He offered it. "Take a pull, Eli. This ain't much for thirst, but it'll quiet the shaking." Eli hesitated, then snatched the flask, his relief barely masked. He drank deep, the cheap whiskey burning a temporary path down his throat. When he handed it back, Billy wiped the rim with his thumb. Thorn is a vulture, preying on ground feeders. Vultures gotta be plucked. He tucked the flask away, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his Colt. "I'll see your father gets the stone he deserves, Eli. And Thorn gets the judgment." Eli looked up, hope blossoming dangerously in his wounded eyes. "You mean you'll bring him to justice?" Billy met his gaze, the promise cold and absolute. "I mean the sun won't set on San Patricio again with that dog wearing a badge. You stay put. Don't talk to no one, especially the folks in the livery. They got eyes everywhere." A sudden, sharp sound, the squeak of a rusty hinge from the second-floor window of the Coyote's Rest, cut through the moment. Billy's head snapped up. The blue in his eyes turned to chips of frozen steel. He saw it, a flicker of movement, a glint of reflected light, too slow for an accident, too deliberate for a stray breeze. Giveaway. Billy slowly reached for the Winchester. "Looks like Thorn already sent a dog to guard the scent, boy. You hear that hinge creak? That ain't the wind, partner. That's a whisper saying you talk too loud." The kid didn't wait. With a fluid movement that belied his reputation for recklessness, he lifted Eli carefully from the cart, ignoring the boy's sharp intake of breath as his injured leg shifted. He slung the boy over his shoulder, a dead weight that suddenly felt terribly fragile, and remounted in a single practiced motion. "Hold tight, son. We're moving out of the noon sun." He spurred the paint pony, heading not toward the open desert, but toward the cluster of low, forgotten corrals behind the blacksmith shop. The town remained silent, but the tension was now a physical presence, a tightening in the chest. They passed the livery, and Billy caught the eye of the stable hand, a nervous, wiry man named Jed. Jed's face was pale beneath the grime, his look confirming Billy's suspicion. In the relative gloom of the abandoned stock pen, Billy lowered Eli gently into a trough of stale rainwater. The boy splashed weakly, gasping. "Talk to me, Jed," Billy commanded, wheeling his pony toward the stable boy, who had followed them at a distance. "Who's watching the town? I saw a reflection from the Coyote's Rest." Jed wrung his hands, his eyes darting toward the saloon, which sat like a malevolent wooden beast at the heart of the square. "Two of 'em, Mr. Bonney, hired muscle. They ain't official deputies, but they got Thorn's silver. They ain't left the saloon since the shooting. They been watching the Turner place, and anyone who gets near it." "And the sheriff?" Billy asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Sheriff Thorn rode out half an hour ago, said he was securing the border. But he took his best man, Garrick. They headed toward the old Spanish pass." Billy nodded, the information slotting neatly into place. Thorn was running scared, trying to get an early lead or maybe meet up with reinforcements. Garrick was the first target, the one who would know Thorn's true intentions. The kid gathered his gang members in a hidden, rocky alcove a mile outside San Patricio, a rendezvous point known only to his trusted few. There was Doc Holliday, a lean, coughing man whose wit was sharper than his Bowie knife. Tom O'Folliard, a loyal giant whose shotgun was his second shadow. And Curly Bill Brocious, a dark-eyed veteran of a dozen skirmishes, always assessing angles. The fire was small, the smoke carefully directed low against the wind. Eli sat near the heat, wrapped in a spare blanket, watching the legendary outlaws circle like wolves. "The mark is Sheriff Silas Thorn," Billy began, tracing a map in the dirt with the tip of his boot heel. "He killed a farmer named Turner in cold blood in front of his crippled boy. The boy dragged the corpse across town to draw attention. That's a gutsy piece of work, and I respect it. It means we got an audience and Thorn's got hired guns." Doc Holliday took a slow drag from a hand-rolled cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the twilight. So, a moral quandary wrapped in a bounty. Thorne's a cheap thief, not a legendary villain. Why the big play, Billy? Billy looked directly at Doc, his face illuminated by the firelight, making his features appear carved from stone. Because the silence in that town was rot, Doc. Thorne thinks the frontier is his personal larder. If we let a cripple drag his dead father through the dust and get nothing for it, then we are just buzzards, waiting for the next kill. We ain't buzzards. We're the ones who decide who gets buried clean. Tom O'Folliard shifted his weight, his shotgun resting across his knees. So, the play. Thorne's gone toward the pass. We got 2 hired hands left in the saloon. Rough dogs, I hear. We hit the dogs first, Billy decided, his voice gaining that charismatic magnetic edge that convinced men to follow him into hell. They are Thorne's eyes and ears here. We take them quiet or we take them loud, but they stop talking to the sheriff. Curly Bill, you and Doc circle the Coyote's Rest. Use the shadows of the outhouses for cover. I want the saloon empty by the first bell. Curly Bill grunted, a sound of agreement. And the boy? Eli. Billy looked over at the small figure. He stays here with Tom. Tom, you're his guard. No one gets within a half-mile of this camp. If Thorne doubles back, you make sure the boy gets clear on the pony toward the mesas. Survival first, vengeance second. Doc Holliday rose, stretching his gaunt frame. An excellent night's work, I dare say. A bit of catharsis before the daylight runs us ragged. The plan was set. Neutralize the local enforcers, cut Thorne off from his intelligence, and then pursue the sheriff and Garrick into the pass. As the group melted into the darkening landscape, Billy paused beside Eli one last time. He pressed a small, heavy object into the boy's hand. A gold piece, likely stolen, but now sanctified by purpose. When this is done, son, you get what you came for, and you leave this cursed dust. But until then, you listen to Tom. He's got a bigger heart than he lets on. Eli clutched the gold, the metal warm in his palm. Be safe, Billy. Billy nodded, pulling his bandana up over his nose. Safety is for the grave, Eli. We're going to church. The group split. The only sound left was the eerie, lonely whistle of the desert wind as it threaded through the jagged rocks, carrying the scent of gunpowder and anticipation toward the sleeping town of San Patricio. Give away! Suddenly a low, mournful cry echoed from the direction of the town. The sharp, panicked howl of a coyote. Tom O'Folliard looked up, his hand automatically resting on his shotgun stock. That ain't right, Billy. Too close and too mournful for a hunting call. Billy, already moving toward the sound, offered a grim half-smile. That, Tom, is the sound of the hired help, realizing their watch just got a whole lot longer. Let's see if they can handle a full-blown revival. The twilight of the high desert clung to the ground, painting the edges of San Patricio in bruised purples and deep ochres. The air, cooling rapidly, still held the memory of the day's searing heat, a clinging dampness that promised dew but delivered only grit. Billy and his flanking men moved like wraiths, their leather creaking softer than the dry leaves underfoot. The kid felt the familiar, electric hum of imminent violence, the world sharpening to the point of a single bullet. Doc Holliday and Curly Bill took up positions near the back alley of the Coyote's Rest. They used the stacked barrels and the shadow of the outhouse as cover, their silhouettes unnervingly still. Inside, Billy knew, were 2 men who thought their badge, or their payment, made them untouchable. Billy, meanwhile, approached the front porch. The swinging doors, he noted, were propped slightly ajar by a small wedge of wood, a rookie mistake suggesting arrogance or complacency on the part of the lookouts. He drew his Colt .45, the action smooth and oiled, the weight a familiar comfort. The click of the hammer being pulled back was deafening in the dead quiet. He kicked the doors open with a booming sound that echoed down the empty street. "Gentlemen!" Billy called into the gloom, his voice cutting through the smoky air. "The show's starting early tonight. Thought you might want a front row seat for the curtain call." Inside, the saloon was half dark, lit only by a few sputtering lamps. Two men, large, bearded, and clearly not locals, jumped up from a table near the bar. One fumbled for a worn-out Navy revolver. The other, a brute with a scar across his cheek, managed to draw a wicked-looking Bowie knife, preferring close work. "Bonnie!" the scarred man roared, a tremor of fear under the bravado. "Thorne said you were nowhere near here, you little runt." "Thorne lies a lot, partner," Billy said, stepping fully into the lamplight. His stance was casual, but his eyes were locked, measuring the distance, the draw speed, the flicker of the lamp in their eyes. "He ain't here to clean up his own mess, so you two get to be the appetizers." The man with the Navy pistol managed to level his weapon. Before he could squeeze the trigger, Billy's Colt barked once. The sound was explosive. The man's chest erupted in a spray of dark crimson against the pale wood of the bar. He dropped without a sound, his pistol skittering across the sawdust floor. The scarred brute charged, knife low. This was where Doc Holliday chose to make his entrance. From the side window, a single crisp report from a shotgun, a devastating blast, hit the charging man's center mass. The impact lifted the brute off his feet, slamming him against the far wall with sickening force before he slumped down in a broken heap. "A bit messy, Billy," Doc coughed, stepping through the broken window, a plume of smoke curling from his sawed-off weapon. "But effective. Their manners were atrocious." Curly Bill appeared at the front door, his expression grim. "Clean sweep. No alarms. Seems they weren't expecting company tonight." Billy moved to the table the men had been occupying. On it, next to half-empty whiskey glasses, were a stack of silver dollars and a crudely drawn map. "They weren't just waiting," Billy murmured, pointing to the map. "They were scouting. This looks like the Spanish Pass, and look here." He stabbed a finger at a small, marked spot near the crest. A cabin, likely where Thorne's holding up with Garrick. Doc Holliday leaned in, examining the map under the lamplight. "It's a natural choke point. Thorne plans to ambush anyone coming after him, not just us. He's expecting trouble, Billy, just not this kind of trouble." It was then that Curly Bill, moving to check the body of the scarred man, found something tucked inside his vest pocket, a small folded piece of parchment sealed with wax. "Hold on. This is a dispatch, Billy. Looks like it was meant for Thorne." Curly Bill carefully broke the seal. He unfolded the paper, his brow furrowing as he read the hurried script. "What is it, Bill?" Billy pressed. Curly Bill looked up, his usual stoicism replaced by a hard, flat realization. "It's from the telegraph office in Fort Sumner. Thorne sent this yesterday. It says they've got intel on an incoming shipment, not the payroll. Says they're expecting a large supply of dynamite to be delivered to the pass by a contact tomorrow morning." The atmosphere chilled instantly. Thorne wasn't just running from a murder, he was arming a position. "Dynamite?" Billy echoed, the implication massive and explosive. "He ain't planning on a shootout. He's planning on sealing the canyon, trapping us and blowing us to kingdom come with the whole pass." Billy Thorne's cruelty was always one step ahead of his courage. He was a cornered animal, planning a landslide. "We move now," Billy declared, pocketing the dispatch. The reflective moment was over. The survival instinct took over. "Tom and Eli are waiting. We ride hard. If Thorne sets that charge before dawn, we're trapped with no way out but back through the 2 hired guns we just sent to meet their maker." Doc Holliday, surprisingly energized, began reloading his scattergun. "Well, Billy, it seems we've traded a simple execution for a siege. A much more theatrical affair, I'd say." "To give away." Billy looked out the broken door into the ink-black street where the moon had finally begun to rise, painting the desert in silver and deep shadow. "Theatrical it is, Doc, but this time we're the ones lighting the fuse." The ride to Spanish Pass was a desperate, grinding race against the sunrise and the ticking clock of Thorne's dynamite. Billy pushed the horses mercilessly, the air thin and cold at the higher altitude. Tomo Folliard, keeping the small, wounded Eli tucked securely in the middle of their small column, rode with the grim determination of a man guarding the last shred of his own honor. By the time the first pale light scraped the eastern peaks, they had reached the mouth of the pass, a narrow, winding canyon flanked by towering sheer rock faces. The terrain was textbook ambush country. "No sign of the dynamite delivery," Billy whispered, pulling his pony to a stop behind a cluster of scrub oak. "But look up there." He pointed with his chin toward a low-slung, fortified cabin perched precariously on an outcrop overlooking the main trail. "Thorn and Garrick, they're waiting for dawn, or maybe waiting for us to show our hand." "They got the high ground, Billy," Tom muttered, checking the load on his shotgun. "And likely a few more eyes we ain't seen." Billy smiled, a cold, predatory expression that sent a shiver down Tom's spine. "They got the high ground, Tom. But we got the moral advantage and a very short attention span for injustice." The attack began not with a charge, but with calculated chaos. Billy ordered Curly Bill and Doc Holliday to circle wide, moving through the rugged, higher paths, the flanking maneuvers of experienced desperados. Their job, create noise and draw fire away from the main assault. Billy and Tom rode straight up the canyon floor, drawing the attention of the cabin sentries. "Thorn, we know what you did to Turner. Come out and face the music," Billy bellowed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls like a thunderclap. A volley of rifle fire answered immediately. Bullets whined off the rocks around them. Billy drew his Colt and fired 3 rapid shots toward a shadowy figure moving near a lookout post on the western ridge, likely Garrick. The figure disappeared with a sharp cry. As the cabin focused its return fire on the visible threat, Doc Holliday and Curly Bill opened up their flanking attack. Doc's shotgun roared from the east, targeting the cabin's single small window, while Curly Bill hammered the west wall with steady Winchester fire. The crossfire unnerved the defenders instantly. Inside the cabin, Sheriff Thorn, his face slick with sweat, was pacing near a rough-hewn table. "Blast it, Garrick. We got company. They ain't scared of the high ground." Garrick, a giant of a man, was bleeding from a superficial shoulder wound. "Dynamite set, Sheriff. Just need you to light the fuse on your signal, and we seal the damn canyon." Billy saw his chance. As Thorn moved toward the dynamite cache, Billy put a heavy Colt round through the cabin door hinge, shattering the wood and throwing the door inward. He charged through the opening, ignoring the muzzle flash of Thorn's own pistol. The interior was smoke-filled and cramped. Garrick was still moving, but Billy was faster. The kid dodged the wild swing of Garrick's rifle butt and slammed the barrel of his Colt against the man's temple. Garrick dropped like a felled oak. Sheriff Thorn, surprisingly, was not hiding. He stood frozen by the table where the crude bundle of dynamite lay strapped to a timer mechanism. His face was a mask of pure terror, the swagger of the town square utterly evaporated. You ain't law," Thorn stammered, backing away from the outlaw. "You're just a damn killer like me." Billy advanced slowly, his gun held steady, the muzzle almost touching the sheriff's chest. The air vibrated with tension. The only sound was the distant thud-thud of Doc and Curly Bill finishing their cleanup, and the heavy, rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the fuse timer. "You executed an innocent man in the sun, Sheriff. You laughed." Billy's voice was low, resonating with personal offense. "That ain't killing, Thorn. That's theft. You stole his chance. I'm here to balance the ledger." Thorn made a desperate last-second lunge for a derringer tucked in his belt. He never got it clear. Billy fired once. The shot was clean, centered, and final. Thorn pitched forward, his hand inches from the hidden weapon, falling over the table and sending the ticking dynamite bundle tumbling to the dirt floor. Billy immediately grabbed the bundle, his eyes locked on the rapidly burning fuse. He had seconds. He bolted from the cabin, screaming a warning. Doc Holliday and Curly Bill saw him coming and scrambled for cover. Billy didn't look for his horse. He ran toward the nearest deep fissure in the rock face, a place where the canyon floor plunged 20 feet into darkness. He threw the bundle with every ounce of strength he possessed, not down the trail, but into the fissure. The resulting explosion was deafening. The ground shuddered violently, a deep, visceral whump that sent a shockwave through the canyon. Dust Rock and debris erupted upward in a churning brown column against the rising sun. The blast sealed the deep fissure, but it left the canyon path open. Thorne's attempt to bury them had failed. Instead, he buried his own greed. Hours later, the sun was high and unforgiving again, but the air in San Patricio felt lighter. The vultures, sensing a change in the wind, had moved on. Billy, Tom, and Doc rode back into the square. Eli was waiting where they had left him, resting against the cool stone of the blacksmith's wall, Tom having kept vigil. He looked up, his face masked by dust, searching. Billy dismounted, his movements stiff but controlled. He walked over to Eli, his face devoid of triumph, simply exhausted. "It's done, son," Billy said softly. Sheriff Thorne and his friend Garrick decided to take a permanent vacation in a hole of their own making. The gunslingers you saw, they're also resting. Eli looked toward the distant canyon mouth, the visible scar on the earth. He didn't ask about the dynamite. He just stared at the dust settling on the ground where his father had lain. "And my father?" Eli whispered. Billy glanced at Tom, who nodded. "We gave him a proper stone, Eli. Found a flat slab, moved it near the creek bed. No buzzards got near him." Billy produced a small leather pouch filled with the silver Thorne had left in the saloon. "This is yours, enough to get you west. Find a place where the sun sets on something other than a grave." Eli clutched the pouch, then looked up at the famous outlaw, the man who had become the embodiment of the justice the law refused to deliver. "Thank you, Billy," the boy managed, his voice thick with an emotion too large for his small frame. Billy merely tipped his hat, the brim shielding his eyes. He swung back onto his pony. He wasn't a hero. He was a necessity, a storm that cleansed the land before moving on. "Don't thank me, son," Billy said, spurring his horse into a slow trot. "Thank the promise you made to the dust. That's the only kind of vow that sticks out here." And with the jingle of spurs and the steady beat of hooves, the legend of Billy the Kid and the wounded boy who dragged his father to him began to fade back into the shimmering heat haze of the New Mexico territory.